Nice. Now, welcome officially, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I think everybody is here from all over the world, so I love that. I'm here today again with Stephen Gates for our last fire session for season 3. Next week, we are starting a new season, a new program. And I would like to start by introducing Echoes for a little bit for those who do not know us yet. Bear with me because I'm trying to share my screen for a quick second here. My name is Luna. I am the program manager for Echoes Design Leadership. We are going to season 3. It's quite crazy to think that it has been 3 years, and Stephen, you have been in this journey with me since, so you know that time is literally flying, and I love this. So far, we already graduated around 200 participants from all over the world. We are Echoes. We are an independent, desirable futures lab. We have 2 business models. This is our consulting, the Desirable Futures Lab, and we also have Echoes the School, where, for instance, design leadership lives under. And the reason why we're here today is to share, articulate design, get more people engaged into understanding what design is, because our purpose is to foster, to empower the next generation of design leaders worldwide. And I feel like we have been doing that, especially since design leadership started 3 years ago. We are part of the Global Design Thinking Alliance. We are the only independent lab among all these big names here conducting research on design for the past 11, almost 12 years now. And everything we do is through design. I think that's pretty obvious. We are a Desirable Futures Lab. We are driven by design. We believe in the power of design, especially when we think of design as a way to transform realities. And I feel like at this point, even though I believe that there is already a shift in by merging design and business, and I think we are going to be talking a lot about that today with Stephen. We are here still trying to advocate for this intersection between design and business. In 6 days from now, on the 3rd of April, we are starting season 3 of Design Leadership Program. This is our journey for this program this time. It's a 10-week program, quite intense. There's a lot that you are going to be questioning about yourself, about businesses. We understand design leadership as something that emerged from this 4 pillars here, which is a lot about you and yourself. You need to understand who you are. It's a lot about you and others and how to create that interaction on a daily basis. It's a lot about you and everything that you design, products, business, services, experiences. And it's also about the systems where you're inserted, because necessarily anything that you are creating is impacting someone somewhere. There's a little bit of the lineup for this season. I'm super excited. It's going to be the 3rd time that I'm taking the program, so I feel like I am quite blessed for this opportunity. You will be able to know more in depth about all of those people that you see here on our website. It's an exclusive program. Most of our participants are either design leaders or CEOs or CDOs from all over the world. If you would like to sit down and have a conversation with me about the structure of the program, if you would like to enroll, we still have a couple of seats available. We are starting next week. There's a little bit of the timing. Of course, it changes depending on your time zone. And if you need to have a conversation, I still have some slots available this week, but really not much because I am trying to wrap up everything. But I'm the person who will be answering your emails. But this is it for now, because the only reason why we're here today really is to start talking about this paradigm shift that we are seeing, and I would say in many levels is still trying to create when we're talking about design and business, and still articulating the power of design as an innovation catalyst. But maybe now, especially with everything that has been happening for the past 2 or 3 years because of the pandemic and then all the layoffs and massive hiring, how is it that we could potentially, by transferring design to a core business capacity, maybe shield up design or your company or your team. And I would love to hear from Steve how you see, Steve, this movement being created, if it's even actually being created, and if it's being created, how do you see companies benefiting from understanding that design can be at the core business?
It's I feel like after 3 seasons, I can almost lip sync along with that intro. I mean, look, this is the question of the moment, right? I think this has been the question for a while, but I think especially over the last 6 to 10, 12 months, this has been the question, because I think, the interesting part is I work with so many CEOs and so many companies and so many teams who say they want to get better, they want to be more innovative, they want to be more creative, they want to do all those things. And whenever you ask them what companies do they idolize, it's always that, same list of the Nikes and Apples and all that sort of stuff. And that, these are companies where design is core to their business. Whenever you look at what they do, they understand that, putting the customer at the center of what you do, of ideating and prototyping a lot of things, and being able to do that always works out well for the business. There have been, I don't know how many studies. Whenever I was at Envision, we did a big study that'll show you, on average, companies that have high design maturity are worth about 26 times more than companies that aren't. So I think, we're drowning in data, we're drowning in a lot of those sort of things that says this should be a really good idea. But for years, the data also shows us that, the challenge is, whenever you look at globally a lot of companies and you look at their design maturity, you look at how they're adopting design, about 83% of the world's companies are in the bottom to the middle of design maturity. So they know they need to do it, but we're not getting there. And so I think, that's been a longstanding challenge. And I think, for a lot of design and for design leaders, first it was, how do we get a seat at the table? We need to get a seat at the table. We need to get it. Getting it wasn't the problem, right? Like, there are now enough chief design officers. There's now enough of this other stuff. Getting it wasn't the problem. It was, what do you do once you're there, and how do you have an impact, right? And I think that's the big challenge for what that is, of how do we change what I think has been the predominant trend, that a lot of creatives have really worked really hard to learn business. I don't know that a lot of businesses learn design. And so, we know all the buzzwords, we know what we should be doing, but we're not seeing the benefits, and we're not seeing the change. And I think that's a big focus of the talk I want to do. But I think, it's the same sort of challenge that we've been up against for a number of years. But I think obviously over the last 6 to 12 months, that's definitely intensified, because as you've seen, quiet quitting has turned into very loud layoffs. As you've seen an economic slowdown, you've seen the credit markets turn into something very different. So cash is harder to come by. There's a lot of things that's putting a lot more pressure on the bottom line. And I think historically, I would think and hope, because I've been through this probably about every 5 years, that companies, would learn that the first thing they usually seem to do is they cut marketing, they cut design, they slow down a lot of those sort of things, only to realize 6 to 12 months later that we don't have any product or demand for that product. So again, I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge as we go through, probably the next 1, 2, 3 years, looking at some of the economic headwinds of how do we continue to make design a priority in the business, whenever historically they will go back to ground on some things that they feel a little bit more comfortable and certain with. Because I think for a lot of companies, mostly what they struggle with design is the uncertainty. And I think, for a long time I've joked, if you ever want to go into a company and scale design, stop calling it design. Because I think, we're also in an environment where design thinking, design sprints, design systems, anything that has the word design in it, at a few too many companies, that's seen as a mark of ownership, not as a mark of collaboration. And so again, I think, these are all issues that a lot of leaders I talk with are kind of wrestling with right now.
I love all you're saying, and I think it makes a lot of sense. For instance, what you just said about we are speaking design language, but not necessarily the other way around. I remember last conversation with that we were having with Faye, and today I was actually having a conversation with Bruce Mao, and I quoted Faye and saying, yes, design is actually creating business, not necessarily business creating business. Yet I am learning business language, but business is not learning design language, while I am actually the one creating business and services and everything else.
Mhm.
And with that, yes, now we already have the seat on the table. I think a lot will argue that it took God knows how many decades for that to actually take place. But my question is, if we already have the seat on the table, let's say it's because at some point we are valued or they see some value in design. But if we are valued and we already have the seat on the table, why is it that it's so easy for whenever we have some kind of international crisis or even a national crisis, design is the first one to no longer have the seat available for them so easily?
Yeah, it's that's what I said. I mean, I feel like I've seen this movie for decades, yet we keep watching the reruns because I think that so many companies, and again, I think even for a lot of design leaders, can struggle to articulate design as an output and an outcome, right? There is the actual visual. How do we take an idea and manifest it into an app, a website, an ad, a photograph, a piece of code, whatever it is? So that there's an output that could come out of that process. But I think a lot of other people will realize that design and creativity is also an outcome, meaning we can bring people together, we can ideate through a lot of different ideas, we can go through an experiment and to be able to kind of go through a process to be able to figure out better ideas, better outcomes that can be a lot more collaborative. I think where we often get stuck is that historically design is just seen at, and far too many of the teams I have worked with and the ones whenever they often struggle, they are basing their value in the output and not the outcome. So that it is not saying that design as the execution, as the visual execution, doesn't have value. But the problem is that almost every company in the world sees design in that sense as a commodity. Very, very few, if any, I might even argue, would see that they actually see a business value in design. I think very few can. But I think that's often what happens is that whenever there's an economic downturn, whenever things tighten up, they sort of do the leave the thinking to the business people and the MBAs, you all just make it pretty. And I think we sort of get shoved back into that executional commoditized role. And I think that's the tough part to be, is that, a lot of times that's why the departments are shrunk. That's why, because they would rather outsource it to an agency. They would rather do something else because they just see it as an executional line item. But that's also where I think, the burden is on us, because I can't tell you the number of teams I go into and the amount of business education I need to do to those leaders to be able to ask them, have you actually gone through and capitalized your team? Do you even understand what that is? Do you understand how do you work with finance to be able to capitalize the work you are doing? Because you are often then not subjected to those layoffs, to those financial changes, to be able to do a lot of those things because you're seen as core to the business. But those aren't the things that designers are taught. And also just on top of the fact that I'm pretty sure I went to art school, so I didn't have to do any of that shit. But that's just, it becomes this necessary evil to be able to survive. And it's a tough thing to be able to know or to figure out, how do I learn it?
I hear you, and I probably agree with that. And while you're speaking of that, even though we are here to think of ideally a paradigm shift between design as innovation to design as core business, what I'm hearing you saying is that maybe we are not yet solidified in the paradigm shift from beautification to innovation. So maybe somehow are we still stuck into being perceived, or maybe exposing ourselves still as execution rather than strategy?
I think in too many cases, yes. And I look, a lot of the ways whenever I approach, for the clients that I have now, for the consulting that I do now, I approach it more like a social movement than a process of going in and saying, what are the sort of behaviors that a company needs to have? That this is about creativity, ideation, consumer centricity. This is about making sure that we are putting product out that moves the needle on our business, that, looking at how, we need to myth bust this perception that doing, that sort of testing or design thinking or ideation just slows down the process. And that, we need to just make, which then feeds into, that executional mindset. So I think a lot of what it is really saying that, look, at the end of the day, every company, what they want is, and again, I think this is where the word design can take on a lot of different meanings, right? Because at the end of the day, every company wants teamwork, they want creativity, they want innovation, they want consumer centricity, they want ideas that work. Universally, every company wants that. But again, I think there's a misunderstanding that whenever we use the word design, and that's sort of why I say a lot of times, I don't come in and teach design. I'll teach a discovery mindset, or I'm going to teach, creativity or collaboration. I'm going to call it something else because I want to base it in behavior. I want to make it more like a social movement. I want it to be applicable to everybody, because I think the thing that I like to remember and remind people of is, like, everybody's creative. Everybody knows how to do this. Just most people forgot, right? Like, all you ever need to do is, like, just go hang out with a bunch of kindergartners or a bunch of young kids, right? Like, everybody's a singer, a superhero, a painter. They are open channels of creativity. And then most of the people on this call and most of the people on your team and things like that are like, we're the kids that survived. We're the ones, whenever they said, like, oh, that drawing thing isn't like a real profession, we didn't really listen. So everybody has that ability to be creative. Everybody has the want to be able to do it. But I think the biggest thing isn't necessarily around getting away from execution as much as it is of how are we the guides for our companies to help them get comfortable being uncomfortable. That, this isn't about sort of the certainty of an answer, that it's a little bit about the process of staying open to the possibility of exploring something. And again, looking at these sort of ideas, and that the benefits that you get from that are so much bigger. Like, whenever I work with teams at Disney, their teams at Disney, where up to 70% of their budget is earmarked to not work, right? They actually plan on it. They bet on it because they know the 30% that does work is going to work so well, it'll pay for the other 70%. And again, I think, but that's where, we get caught up in so many of these conversations around, like, what is the value of design? What is the value of design? What's the one KPI I can put on design? And it isn't, this is why I think creativity and corporate structure fight and really struggle to coexist.
Well, yes, I agree with you. And I believe that is not yet, we're talking about the professional world, but I think that goes in any way in life, really, because it's always a matter of us trying to be authentic and doing something that it's creative, because we are creative beings, and the world kind of consuming us and forcing us to kind of keep the machine working, right? But let's assume that somehow we have the luck, or we are enlightened somehow to be designers and to keep our creativity alive somehow. I don't really know how is it that specific people can do that, but if that is the case, and this is an honest question, if that is the case, why are we struggling so much to bring design to this place of being the core business, or to be understood as something that can generate true value, because the structures are so rigid that our creativity is not strong enough to break in? Or is it something else that us as designers are missing in order for us to be able to solidify our space into the corporate world?
I think that a lot of what it is just, how do you sort of like grab everybody by the hand and show them how it works, right? Because I think, it's amazing the number of times I've taken executives through a design thinking workshop, the number of times that I've actually shown them how it can work, how it can be nimble, how it can be fast, how this doesn't take months and months, and research can be done in 24 hours or with a sketch or those sort of things. Because I just think there's a lot of misconceptions around sort of what it is and what people think it should be. So like, I think it absolutely can happen. I think I've been able to pull it off on multiple teams. But what I'll tell you is, I think the one trick is just, you have to make it real, and you have to make it theoretical, and just sort of saying like, hey, we have value. Hey, we have value. Oftentimes isn't enough. And I think the more that you're able to get people involved in it, because like the one thing that I always try to remember, people support what they're a part of. They rarely support what they're presented. Right. And so again, I think that ability to be able to make them a part of the process, to be able to do those sort of things, and to show them that it actually is possible. right? Because I think a lot of what people are afraid of is that uncertainty. A lot of what they get concerned about is they have been taught a concept of leadership where I need to understand what the destination is before I start the journey. And that, again, that sort of goes back to why I will talk about why you need to get comfortable being uncomfortable, is because a lot of, I mean, I can tell you with 100% certainty, having done it multiple times, if you want to change an industry, if you want to launch something that is innovative, if you want to do those sort of things, you are not going to know where you end up whenever you start that journey. And that terrifies almost every executive in the world. But I think, the trick that I've learned is that what I would do is I would go out and I would do a pilot to show that we can take this sort of work, to be able to work in a particular way, to be able to have design have an impact. And what I would do is I would go out and find a group or a project that nobody cared about. Because I think, one of the biggest problems that people do is they're like, oh, we're going to change this company. Oh, we're going to do this. Let's go take on our biggest product. Let's go take on our biggest problem. Let's go take on the thing that's making us the most money. So basically, go take on the thing where there is the most red tape, the most resistance, the most fear, the most, all the things that are going to shut that down insanely quickly. So I do the opposite and say, I'm going to go find something nobody cares about. So like whenever I brought design and design thinking into Citibank, I went and found a group called Treasury and Transfer Services. Not a group that is fun at parties, but they basically keep the pipes that keep the money moving through the bank going. And I spent time and I taught them design thinking, and I taught them how to do design, and I taught them how to do a lot of those sort of things. And then all of a sudden you have this group that is doing how might we statements and is looking at Post-it notes and has posters and are doing design and doing all this sort of stuff. And I took the CEO down there who was just like, what the hell is going on? He's like, how, all of a sudden they're producing like crazy amounts more work, and they're coming up with all these ideas and they're doing all this stuff, and it's having this huge impact on the bottom line. He's just like, how is this possible? And I said, well, yeah, if we can do this here, imagine what it would be if we did it with the whole firm. And you can just sort of watch that realization kind of wash over them of like, holy shit. And I think that was the thing, was that it wasn't, I'm not giving them a case study of where it happened somewhere else at some other company or in our industry or some other analog or whatever that is, because those all get dismissed too easily, right? Like it's like yesterday's winning lottery numbers, where it's like somebody who you aren't at a company that you aren't a part of on a project you don't have at a time that you're not in did something. Who cares? So I think that ability, but then also sort of, again, being willing to get in and remember that everybody is creative, to help get them involved in that process, to help empower them to be able to do that. And that sort of movement then, because I think that was what, whenever I was at Citibank, all of a sudden, that's why we launched 7 times more product in my first year than we had the last 7 years combined, because we leaned into design thinking. That's why my team went from 35 people to over 400, because all of a sudden everybody bought in at a scale that actually was very problematic because it was explosive growth. But like all of a sudden everybody got it and they could see it and they were a part of it and they understood what it was. But it wasn't sort of, being design and that like, I'm going to go off and do a watercolor of my spirit animal while wearing a beret and a whole lot of black and telling you how you don't understand, right? It was saying, look, I believe in you. Let's be a part of this. Let's do this together. That went a really long way.
I love this, and I love this example, and I'm a designer, so I believe in it. I believe that when you bring people to actually engage into whatever process is the easiest way to have any mindset shifts happen. But I'm going to play a little devil's advocate, okay?
Sure.
Let's say you are that design leader, or let's say you're not even the design leader. You're only in the design team. And you are overwhelmed with work that it's just 100% execution. And you would love to have the possibility of creating those pilots and maybe thinking, what is this, black sheep that no one's looking into in the company, but you feel like you don't have the time. How can you then, in situations like this, which I believe is what the majority of people here might feel like they are at, how could they, in these situations, kind of try to create those pilots, kind of try to advocate for design by showing that it can actually?
Yeah. No, and it's a really good question, because I think, that for so many of the teams that I talk with, coach, work with, it's not that they don't understand the problem, right? It's not that they don't understand where their challenges are or the barriers are, the executives who are the challenge or whatever it is, right? Like they're often incredibly clear about all of those things. That in a lot of cases, what it is where do we start, right? It's sort of like, you know, you can either look at the brick or you can look at the wall. And too often we're looking at the wall and it's just like, I don't begin to understand, how do I start? What do I do? Where do I go? Because it does often feel so much bigger. And I think that, you know, in a lot of those cases, what I would say is fine, because in that, you know, book of work, in what it is you're doing, I'm going to bet that there's something in there that is a project that would give you that opportunity. I'm going to bet that there's a partner who would be open to working in a new way. I'm going to be right. Like I'm going to bet that there's something in there that you can start with just that project and use that as the example. Because again, I think, you know, one of the other concepts that I always really like to lean into is organizational jealousy, which is there's a lot of partners and there's a lot of people who I've worked with who just don't care about changing. They like to be in charge. And that the thought of design or creativity challenges product or engineering or executives because now all of a sudden they aren't going to be right. And that's how they base all of their worth, is in being right. And so again, I think that ability to partner with those people, to be able to find that project, to work a little bit differently, to find some success, and then go talk about it. Of like, what did we do differently? What are we trying to do? How are we partnering about that? Because again, what that's going to start to get is executive recognition. People going like, that's great. We did 3 times as much work with, you know, the same budget, or like whatever that is. And that will start to make people jealous. And I think that there is a lot of, again, trying to scale design and things like that, is going to work with the people that are willing to work with you, and to find that like those sort of people that you can partner with. Because I think that's the other part, is that oftentimes whenever you go it alone, one team or one person can often be fairly easy to minimize or defeat. If I'm able to find a partner in product, a partner in engineering, an executive who, you know, will see the benefit in what this is, if we can use that, if we can do the pilot, if we can just start with that, then I think it's interesting, because then you'll start to watch the rest of the organization come around, because now all of a sudden they want to, why aren't their numbers going up? Why aren't they doing better work? Why aren't they able to get those sort of results? Why aren't they sort of the cool kid or whatever that is? And then all of a sudden you'll find that partners who are very difficult can become much more malleable in their approach, because they've seen that it's working for other people. And it's that want for recognition, that want for success will overcome their uncertainty and their fear about the unknown. So I think that sometimes it's just looking at what are those motivators that are going to get people to move the way that you want. So again, I think I've seen it a number of times in taking that sort of a grassroots approach. But again, I think that's often the difficult part with that. But I think the other part for so many leaders that I coach is to remember that as you set out on that journey, as you're not quite sure where do we start, what you need is a plan, not the answer. Because I see a lot of other leaders will sort of get stymied and get stopped because they're like, okay, well, before we do this, I have to know how this is going to go and how this is all going to work out. And I have to have all the answers and I have to know what this is. And until I have that, then I'm not sure that I'm ready to start, right? Like the imposter syndrome jumps up and grabs the wheel. We don't have all the answers whenever we start a design project. We don't have all the answers whenever we do all this other stuff. So why do we need to have this here? So I think that's one of the big things I'll coach leaders on, is whenever you start that journey, what you need is a plan, not the answer, right? Like take the benefit of time, take the benefit of the support, take the benefit of the journey to figure it out as you go and see what works and what doesn't, as opposed to this idea of like, okay, I've got to have all this figured out, because then you're also setting yourself up to fail, where it's like the first bump in the road, you watch those leaders go like, yep, I knew it. We weren't going to do it. It's going to be too hard. So again, I think that also, that mentality or that approach will give you some grace as well as some other things to be able to help figure out how to start on that journey.
I love it, and I took note of it. I really adore this concept. You don't need an answer, you need a plan. And I think that can be taken into any aspect of life, really, especially when you're talking about work, especially with design leaders too. Like one of the classes we have for design leadership is paths for design leaders, because it's still unknown in so many ways. Like, and you can say that from firsthand with what happens with you last year, and how you just shifted something that happened to you and a benefit for something that can help you and other companies now with Crazy. And what I think I'm hearing from you, and it's the theme of the the masterclass that you're going to conduct this year, is that ability to really be paying so much attention and being so present with the business that you understand who are the partners within the business, or maybe even outside the business, that can help you articulate design.
Right.
Would you like to talk a little bit more about this? How can you maybe find those partners? What takes for you to recognize who are these people? They're just as crazy as you, or as willing as make the change as you?
Well, it is. And I think, I think that's often the part, right? Because I think, the role that I tend to embrace, that I embrace as an in-house team, that I definitely embrace now with my own studio, is to be a bit of that agitator, to be a bit of the disruptor, to be the one who takes pride in being different and being crazy and being, because I think, so many companies need diversity in a lot of different ways. But I think, one of the ways that they often need it is cognitive diversity, right? Because they hire too many people that think the same, look the same, like so much innovation and creativity is killed because what people spend most of their time doing is these internal arguments around like which team is right? Like, is an executive right? Is product right? Is design right? Is design, is engineering, like, who cares? Right. And so I think, those aren't the arguments we need to have. And so I think, that's where I think design has such an opportunity to come to the table and really embrace that perspective. And I think that too often, because of some of the imposter syndrome and things we carry, we show up at that table with feeling like we're at a bit of a deficit. We don't quite speak the language. We're not quite sure how to be able to do this. And that we're more focused on what we think we aren't than what we are. And I think that that's often what I've found is, whenever you're the one who is able to come in and lead with a question, who can work through a problem, who can figure out whatever the answer is, who can just show up and have a plan when everybody else is trying to show up with the answer, whenever you can, again, help everybody get comfortable being uncomfortable and to help lead them through that process, that's an insanely powerful thing, because it's a skill that everybody has, but not many people can manifest or talk about. And it is design, it is creative. It's in a different form than what they may look like historically. But I think that whenever you start to show up in that way, whenever you start to ask those questions, prompt those sort of things, one of the things you're going to see pretty quickly usually are who are the people who are like, ooh, I want that, right? Like, how do I participate with that? How do I want to be a part of that? And I think, my personal philosophy in the brands that I built, in the companies that I've been a part of, and even in my own personal career, is that like, I always want to be a brand, and I want to build brands and experiences that somebody will hate. And that always sounds very clickbaity, right? Because it's like, what the hell? But the reason why I want to do that is because I want to be somebody who shows up with an opinion that is strong enough that if you love it, you love it. And if you don't, you want to disagree with it, right? Because there is taking a stand. If I want to build a brand, it wants to stand for something. If I want to build an experience, it stands for something. But that is an insanely hard thing to do in corporate culture. Because in corporate culture, what most people are doing is they're just sort of floating around with the prevailing wind. They're going with whatever their boss said. They're just kind of like, yeah, I'm going to be whatever, you want me to be, which is easy to do, but in the end, incredibly soul crushing. Because the harder thing to do is to show up and say, I think we should do, like, there is a way to do this, or an approach that I want to take, as opposed to just, I'm going to do what somebody else tells me. And I think that that's often the hard part, because then I'm taking a stand, I'm taking a position, I'm saying we should do something. And that by doing that, I'm planting a flag and holding a spot where people can join me, people can make fun of me, people can take pot shots at me, people can do whatever that is. But I think that's how you find those partners, because I think, most of the time, whenever I come into an organization, I'm trying to deliberately provoke a response. I'm trying to say, this is a process, this is the way we want to do things, because I want to find the people who want to be a part of that. I want to find them. The people who want to do it, but maybe have been a little bit too beat down by the process for too long, I want to identify them and figure out how do I nurture them and bring them out. And then candidly, the people that are there just to collect a paycheck, I want to identify them too, to either figure out how do I rehabilitate them and get them into the fight, or how do we start to have conversations around, this is not the way things are going to be going forward, and we need to look at something different. But it is, again, trying to take a stand, because we deal in a medium where there's not a right answer, right? Like 2 + 2 isn't 4. It's like burnt sienna. Design is infinitely debatable, right? There's not a right answer to a problem. And so, I think that's why, as a leader, the thing that I'm cultivating in myself and in my partners is that I know my stock and trade and my success is based in my ability to trade in trust and confidence, right? That's what's going to make me successful at the end of the day, because at some point, to do great work, you're going to have to take a leap. Somebody's going to have to trust you. You're going to have to take a risk. And I want people to always know that I may be crazy, but I'm not stupid. And that if I'm going to do that, it's based in enough research or enough data or enough thinking that I'm probably going to land it, even if it feels a little weird, right? And I think that sort of energy can be contagious. That sort of way of working can be very different for people, but it sort of takes the intestinal fortitude to take that first step and to say, hey, let's try doing this a different way.
I am in awe with everything you're saying, because first of all, it resonates 100% here. First of all, by being someone who was forever called crazy, and it took me so long to take that as a compliment. But I believe, and I would like to maybe recap what you're saying, because I think a lot that you're saying right now, Steve, falls under those 4 spheres that I presented in the beginning here when we were talking about design leadership. Because how could you ever defeat imposter syndrome and actually have the confidence and the authenticity to express yourself freely without without being scared of being judged, if you don't really self-reflect? I don't think you will ever be able to even recognize those other people if you don't go within and understand yourself. So I think number 1, again, it's about yourself, you and yourself. 2, it's a lot about how you can then articulate what is it that you want to express to other people and be able to tell them, hey, I feel like we are the same, without making the other person feel belittled or anything. Like, how can we join forces? So again, it's a lot about being able to connect and talk. And then from there on, everything else. And yes, those things are design leaders' characteristics, but I think before anything else, even if you're not the design leader in that team, you can still go on and start trying to pilot and start making those changes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it is. And I think a lot of that's just being open to, again, to go on the journey, to be able to like figure out what that is. I mean, like that was one of the things, like finances are not my strong suit, right? Like that was not something I really was good at. But what I used to do is I would go and I would sit and listen to our earnings call, and I knew what restaurant our CFO liked. So I would take her out to lunch, right? I'd be like, hey, I'm going to go there. Do you want to tag along? Sure. Every time she would go. And then I had my little list of questions of like, okay, so help me understand this part about the company performance. What does this actually mean? Can you explain this to me? And I think like it's amazing how far you can go and what you can get people to do whenever you lead with questions instead of statements, right? I think even if you look at the way your team is positioned, if you start to look at having more conversations and less presentations, like the number of teams that I would say, like, look, take your work out of Google Slides, take it out of Keynote, take it out of whatever it is, present it in Figma, present it in Mural, present it in Miro, present it in some way where it doesn't feel finished, where it can be a conversation, not a presentation. Just the number of CEOs, whenever I'll do a session like that, I'll go in with like a virtual whiteboard or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden the rest of the C-suite is like, what the hell just happened? How did you have a meeting like that? Like, that was amazing. And it's like, yeah, all you fools keep going in and presenting to them, and like, they want to be a part of it. They want to have an opinion. They want to have trust and confidence in what's going on. Like, plus on top of the fact that like, damn it, I'm in design. So like, I'm going to come in with stuff that's a lot more fun than the spreadsheets and crap that you have. So I'm going to lean into that like, yeah, let's go draw a bunch of stuff, or like, let's actually have fun with that. That was the thing I used to bank on at Starwood and stuff like that, was like all the executive leadership would always say they loved the meetings with my team because they knew out of their like drudgery of a day and like talking about financials and everything else, the design meetings were going to be fun. Right. And so I think, but it was leaning into that, like, yeah, come on in, let's sketch a bunch of stuff. Let's get weird. Let's do whatever it is. And they would but they would just show up in the right frame of mind before we'd even say a word.
I love that. And we can do it, right? That's our role, especially going back to what you said about the word design. If we already have that, let's just use it, right? Because people have already so many assumptions about what it is. So why not? And then
Right.
linking that to, okay, and again, playing a little bit of a devil advocate, we are here to try to talk about how can we, or how might we be ever able to bring design from an innovation capacity to the core business. I would like to maybe make it super clear, maybe have some little touch points that people that are here now can feel like tomorrow they can start the first thing to create this, because I believe it's a gigantic shift that has to happen. Yes, it starts with you and your team and your company, but ultimately, if the whole industry doesn't embark on that, it's going to keep being hard, and we're going to keep seeing those big layoffs.
Yeah. No, and look, I think that the couple of basics that I usually will tell leaders and teams to be able to start with is, I think, one, we hit on this a little bit. Look at who are your allies, right? Like, look at the ones where are the places where you could have a conversation with them about what is working, what isn't working, different ways of working through ideas, even if it's just somebody that is open to the idea, even if they've always, because at the end of the day, at my team, what I want is I want a problem to be solved, not a solution to be vetted, right? Because too many times, teams that are stuck in that executional place, people show up and say, hey, this is what we should do, right? Like, go make it pretty. Even if it's just you, there is somebody in that conversation who is open to you saying, okay, that is an idea, not the idea, right? Like, we're going to take that, we're going to work that up, but we're going to work on one or two other ones too, just to be able to show you that there's value in our thinking, just not in execution. I think start to focus on where can you find a few of those conversations. I think the other thing that I'll tell people to focus on that I think it makes such a huge difference is to really focus on and look at what is the culture of feedback that you have. Because for so many teams that I've gone into that are low design maturity or whatever it is, often one of the most defeating things and one of the toughest processes is the way that the team gives and gets, but more than anything, receives feedback. Do people know what good feedback looks like? Are they taking the time to be able to understand that? Like, I will actually develop feedback guidelines that say, I need you to think about what the problem is. I need you to hear what has been done. And then I need you to formulate a question, not a solution. That, and have actually like more emotional guidelines of like how you say like something can matter almost more than what you say. And to be able to start to look at that moment, because I think too often design teams will take feedback as defeating, that like, why didn't they just love it? Too often other teams don't know how to communicate sort of what their issues are. And then a lot of the breakdown in trust and a lot of things like that can start in those sort of moments of feedback, whether it's from the brief all the way to the finished execution. But so again, I think look at where you can have those conversations, know that it's not going to be with everybody, find those places where you can start to make a difference, start to have that conversation, start to be able to make some actual progress. And then look at, what are those sort of moments, those pink elephants, those moments of breaking down in your process. And like I said, a lot of times this is around how, what is the problem you're being given? How are you communicating feedback with your teams? That in a lot of cases, we are just simply accepting that because that's the way that it's always been. Because I think as design leaders, yes, it is important that we produce good design. But I think for me, it's always been more about, it is my responsibility to create a safe space where creativity can happen, right? It's not my job to necessarily get in and have the ideas, but it is to create a space that recognizes good ideas, not even great ideas, are fragile, and that they need the time and space to be able to develop and think before somebody runs in and tells you why it can't be done, right? So I think, go and talk to your team too. I guarantee you, if you say, what are the three, let's do an exercise and map out the 3 moments that consistently defeat us and consistently are the problem, that they will have that down in about 15 minutes, right? And then look at, are there ways we can start to build partnerships? Are there ways we can use process? Are there ways or conversation? Can we bring somebody into this process to be able to look at that sort of stuff? Again, I did that when I went into City, and like legal and regulatory was one of the biggest breakdowns every single time. They would say, we come up with this great idea, and then go to regulators or go to legal. They tell us we can't do it. They can't tell us we can't do it. They tell us we can't do it. Great. Let's go look at that. Right. So we started to bring legal and regulators into the process. And instead of saying, hey, we did this thing, will you approve it? We just started by saying, hey, we're trying to solve this problem. Will you help us do it? And again, that simple switch of just saying, will you participate in what this is, made a massive difference. Like there was always one, it's a very bank accomplishment, but like there was one mobile flow that had 64 form fields. I can't think of a more financial institution problem than a mobile flow that has 64 form fields. But again, we were told all of them were sacred. All of them, like, there's nothing you can do. Well, we just brought in the regulators and went one by one and said, what about this? What about this? Whenever we relaunched it, it had 5. But that was the thing. We just took it at face value and took it at what that was and didn't try to identify what the problem was. It still would have had 64. So I think, again, it's about coming up with that plan of sitting down and saying, what are the problems we need to solve? And then what are those things we want to do? Because I think that's often the problem with a lot of these talks is like, there's nothing I'm going to say that everybody's going to go, ooh, that's going to fix it. Right. There's not a magic bullet to what this is. But I think in a lot of cases, leading with that sort of vulnerability, leading with, understanding what the problem is and going into it, knowing that people are creative, it's just my job to bring that out, as opposed to I am creative and everyone else is in my way. Sometimes those sort of mental shifts are looking at how do I bring people into that world, knowing that a lot of times what is driving them is more fear and insecurity than anything else.
I love that. I think you said something that maybe wrap this up, which is it's a matter of your mental shift before you can create any shift in your company, because otherwise you're just going to be hoping instead of actually doing it. It's like those people who wants change, everybody put their hands up. Who wants to make change, and then everybody just sits down.
Yeah, and I have worn out my teams for years with a phrase that is very much aligned to that, because I will always say, like, hope is not a strategy. Because whenever I talk to people, they're like, well, I hope they do this, or I hope, and it's just like, nope, right? Like, again, hope is not a strategy for getting design a seat at the table. Hope is not a strategy, like hoping that at some point somebody's going to get it and going to get it done, right? And I think the more we can make it concrete, the more we can bring them in, the more we can help empower them to be a part of that. Like, that's the funny thing, is when you start doing that, all of a sudden you can rewire an entire company, rewire the way they all think. You didn't touch a process, you didn't touch an org chart, you didn't, like, all of a sudden it's like some Jedi mind trick thing where like all of a sudden it's like, wait, this whole thing is suddenly different. What happened? But again, by bringing them in, it allows them to participate. And I think that's why I love design thinking, or I love design sprints so much, because I think even whenever you do that, it puts the customer at the center. It immediately empowers the design team to be the guide in what that process is, but also it's inclusive, right? It brings everybody in and says, hey, let's solve this together, so that then they feel like it was their idea. But again, you're the one who's able to sort of work through that process with them.
Yeah. And once you really want to make a change, like keeping the ego of who started, who did it, it doesn't really, again, create a solution for anything. So you might as well just be happy enough that you were the catalyst for whatever it is to at least happen or start, which I think is what we need right now.
No, but I think that's the, like, one of the proudest moments of my career, I think, was whenever you start to realize what you can affect, right? Because again, the product of all the work at Citibank was, about a year later, I was on a different floor. It was like a marketing floor, and I walked into a conference room, and on the whiteboard, somebody had written, "How might we have a great birthday shower?" And I was like, this may be one of the greatest moments of my career, because what it meant was, like, the transformation, the adoption of design had transcended work, right? Like, they saw the value in design thinking, and they saw the value in what that was, to the point where even when they went to go plan a birthday shower for one of their coworkers, they used design thinking. And it's just like, this is incredible. But like, it felt like such a small moment, but that again, people had been able to internalize it and to really understand what that was, that it was amazing that, again, you could start to really watch that transformation take hold inside of the company, because again, they could see the value in it. It wasn't me telling them that, right? It wasn't me going in and saying, hey, take me seriously. Nobody gives a shit about that. But whenever I could show them the value, then that's why it really caught and scaled.
Yeah, it became intrinsic. And I think that's any paradigm is something that it's already intrinsic. Everybody thinks that way. They don't even, it's so familiar, they don't even recognize it until something new comes and you have to change your whole perspective on whatever that is.
Yeah.
I I mean, again, I'm a big fan, so I'm biased, but I am super excited for your class in 2 weeks from now. And I hope that everyone who is here just know that this is almost nothing compared to what a whole masterclass with Steve is. And if you want to have conversations like this, even more in depth, we still have spots available. And I will be rushing, to be honest, because I only have 2 more days of work this week before we have to wrap everything up for Monday. So I'm here being 100% vulnerable, saying that I would love to have you on board, but hoping, even though that's not a good strategy, hoping that I will have time to finalize everything. But we can definitely make that happen. I have an amazing team that helps a lot. Again, these are the dates and this is the times based on Sydney, simply because that's a little easier for us because some of our team is there. But if you have any questions, the website has a feature where you can just translate the time zone to where you're located. It's pretty simple. Otherwise, just shoot me an email. You have my name here on the screen, and you can find me on LinkedIn. Super easy. I am almost always available. And Steve, is there anything that you would like to say for those who could potentially still join us, or those who weren't going to join us now?
No, I mean, look, I don't do many of these sort of things on purpose, right? Because I think there aren't many organizations or many places that I think are truly sort of worth the investment of time. And I think like these are classes that every year I learn stuff from. And I think especially for me, you know, this was just the surface of what that is. And I know like for my master class, like I will share the playbooks. I will share the actual artifacts. I will share like, what does this really look like? How do you bring this to life so that you have those sort of tangible things that will save you days, weeks, months, years of sort of what that is. And I think, you know, this is the 3rd season of this. I still get, you know, emails from people that are like, you know, that thing changed everything. And so I think the quality of the content and sort of what this is, but I think also more than anything, the quality of the community of being able to like go through this with a bunch of other people, to be able to have that experience, to be able to have the Slack community, to be able to have those sort of things. I love this cohort learning model. So again, I think that's why for me, year after year, I keep coming back. I keep doing it, keep putting in the time to be able to be a part of it, because I think it, you know, for me, the benefits of being able to share this stuff to help somebody else out in their journey is beyond worth it.
Thank you. And well, I agree with you. I work with this. This is literally my baby. This year I'm also starting to co-facilitate. So for your session, I'll be there hosting it with you. So it's going to be such an honor.
Nice.
Yes. I mean, I'm also growing and evolving by being crazy and knocking on my boss door, being like, we're going to do this way or that way. And I know that I'm learning because of this program, really. But again, once again, I truly appreciate you. I think what I've been for my own research for the past 3 years is what I've learned is that design leaders are the most humble leaders. You guys are always so available and so willing to help that it fascinates me and gives me hope in everything we're doing, not only to change business, but to change the whole world. And I know I'm quite romantic, but I truly believe in that. So Steve, thank you for being here, exchanging your expertise with everyone. And I will see you on the 10th of April, Steve. And I hope that everyone who is here will make a decision to be joining us. So I'll see you very soon. And let's go. Let's keep going with our Tuesday.
Can't wait.
Yeah. See you soon, everyone. Bye-bye.